The deadline is now. 48 hours ago, President George W. Bush gave Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein an ultimatum. Leave Iraq with your sons or face military conflict. Now at 8 p.m. in Washington, 4 a.m. in Baghdad, time has expired. Saddam Hussein says the administration has made his final mistake. War is imminent. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the coalition of the willing plan to disarm Iraq and cause regime change in its capital. It is a conflict set to begin at the time of the coalition's choosing, a moment believed to be hours or days from now. We've reached this point after a series of events since a ceasefire in the Persian Gulf War of 1991. In order that the bombing end and that Allied forces stop their move to Baghdad, the Iraqi leader signed an agreement that he would destroy all weapons of mass destruction and never again invade neighboring countries or kill his own people. It is the conclusion of the American administration that the Iraqi regime did not and has not disarmed. Saddam Hussein is deemed by the White House a threat to American national security, a brutal, murderous dictator, and a menace to the world. It is the hope of the administration and the goal of the war planners that disarmament and regime change be accomplished as swiftly as practical with as little loss of life as possible. But in conflict, Americans, they warn, will die. Some number of our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters, will give their lives for the cause of freedom. At home, with history as our guide and peace our prayer, we, the citizens of this nation, will no doubt rally round those putting willingly themselves in harm's way. Fox News is committed to bring you fair and balanced coverage of the events to come. The O'Reilly Factor is next. I'm Shepard Smith in New York. For all of us in the Fox News family, thank you for trusting us for your news. With the nation on high alert and our armed forces prepared for war, stay brave, stay aware, and stay with Fox.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly reporting from Washington. Thanks for watching us tonight. Short talking points memo this evening so we can get right to our Iraq coverage. The memo will not be kind to Senator Tom Daschle. Right up front, I have to tell you, I do not respect Mr. Daschle. A few months ago, he publicly criticized the Fox News channel for not being fair to the Democratic Party. That, of course, is baloney. We have just as many Democrats on this network as Republicans. But what Mr. Daschle did not tell you was that we had invited him on The Factor dozens of times, and his staff always dismissed us rudely. Now, to be fair, lots of folks are rude to us because we don't pander to anyone. But Daschle was outrageous in his accusations and intellectually dishonest as well. Now, the South Dakota senator finds himself in the same position as Trent Lott. His credibility is finished. As you may know, Daschle has criticized the war against Iraq, saying, quote, "This president failed so miserably in diplomacy that we are now forced to war." But in 1998, when President Clinton bombed Iraq, Daschle said this: "We have virtually exhausted our diplomatic effort to get the Iraqis to comply with their own agreements and with international law. Given that, we have got to force them to comply, and we are doing so militarily." So what's up with the hypocrisy, Senator? You were all for using force 5 years ago. Now, after 9/11, the threat from Saddam's weapons is even greater. What say you? The no-spin truth is Mr. Daschle's playing politics in a time of life and death, and that should be unacceptable to all Americans, not just Republicans. Senator Lott lost power because his credibility dissolved after he applauded a philosophy that hurt African Americans. Now Senator Daschle is embracing a philosophy that is inconsistent with his past positions, and it is not helpful at all in the war against Saddam. So Talking Points believes it is over for Tom Daschle, at least as far as his national influence is concerned. I also believe the good people of South Dakota need to take a hard look at this guy. And that's a memo. Now for the top story tonight, here's the latest out of Iraq. The 48-hour deadline for Saddam Hussein to get out of Baghdad has passed. He has ignored it. War could come at any time. Thousands of U.S. troops are near Kuwait's border with Iraq, just waiting for orders to cross. Meantime, U.S. jets have dropped bombs on several Iraqi artillery guns in southern Iraq. And 17 Iraqi soldiers have surrendered already to American GIs near the Kuwaiti border. If anything breaks during this hour, we will, of course, bring it to you immediately. Joining us now here in our D.C. studios, Fox News military analyst, Major General Paul Vallely, and in New York, Colonel David Hunt. Major General, you outranked the Colonel, so we'll begin with you.
Oh, starting already. Okay, here we
Colonel,
go.
you know what? You got to watch yourself here. All right, nuts and bolts. All right, nuts and bolts. The order has already been given, you believe, to attack, correct?
I think so. Yes, Bill.
All right. And you were briefed today by very high-ranking military officials, correct?
That's correct.
All right. How does it go down from here?
Well, what happens, Bill, once the president gives the order to launch the military campaign. That then goes from the Pentagon, from the White House to the Pentagon, down to Central Command, and then, of course, over to Qatar, where the main headquarters is. Or it may go directly to Qatar from the Pentagon.
That's where General Tommy Franks
That's where General Franks is, and he's running the operation, just like General Schwarzkopf did
in the first
back in 1991.
So Franks has the discretion to launch when he feels the conditions are best.
That's correct. And what those conditions are, weather, what the enemy is doing, are the troops in the position to launch the attack. So all of those have to come together in the best possible way.
How do they communicate in Qatar with General Franks and his commanders on the Kuwaiti border?
Well, fortunately, with the satellites, Bill, today we can communicate wireless in many cases or secure landlines. So they have a variety of methods to communicate, even through the internet.
Primarily phone, correct?
Phone and even internet.
And okay, they have computers.
Sure, absolutely,
like
that are basically classified.
So Franks doesn't have to go back to the Pentagon now. It's his call when they go.
Well, they're on the line all the time, and so he'll tell the president we're going to launch on such and such an hour. Maybe it's 1 o'clock this morning.
But he will tell the president before he tells
Oh, absolutely. So that's what he has to do, is notify we're ready to go and we're launching at this time on this day.
All right. Now, obviously, the enemy can intercept cell phone calls and all of that. So the safer way is on the landline or
That's what we call secure transmission.
Okay. Now, Colonel, what are you hearing in New York among your sources?
Yeah, you had a bad little firefight in Basra with some special air service, British 2-2 SAS. They whacked a bunch of Iraqis there, probably killed about 10. And they're in there to help these great Marines and British soldiers that are going to hit to Basra. We also had the Air Force bombing today, some artillery pieces that will also could affect these great guys going for Basra. Also, we got a sandstorm problem, which is maybe why we didn't see bombs drop as soon as 8 o'clock tonight landed. The problem is, as the general can verify, talk to you about, is the fact you've got lasers can be affected somewhat by the sand. And again, we attack when we're ready, when it's right for us, and all the pieces are lined up, because there's a big difference how we're going to do this from last time.
Isn't it better for the U.S. to maybe hold back for a day and just spook the Iraqis like crazy, because they're got to be jumpy? I mean, they're running across the border. Someone to surrender now. Sure.
The longer you wait, the more the problem is you're going to have more Iraqis coming across to give up. But we have a better plan. Yeah, absolutely. And that the guys, smart guys, are thinking just that way. Psychological operations people that are advising the general in Qatar and the people at the Department of Defense and tell people exactly that way. But my bet is after the president gave the okay to the general, you go when you want, that now they're playing that game. But I also think, as the general's already mentioned, that weather is one of the key factors, and I think the sandstorm thing is a problem.
Okay. Now, General, when it launches, all right, it's going to be simultaneous, correct? North, South, Basra, Air Force, Marines, boom.
That's right. That's right. Total joint force operation coming from many different directions, Bill. North, from the west, from the south, maybe two-pronged attack, what we call an axis of advance up from Saudi Arabia maybe, and Kuwait, and even from the Persian Gulf, where we have the Marines on those ships with helicopters. Yeah. Now, I think what they may do, there will be a northern front, Bill. There's no doubt about that. That was confirmed today. There will be a northern front.
Yeah, because Turkey's going to let them bring special commandos through. And
probably let some come in under the radar, use the bases. But the Marines have the capability, as well as the 101st, to air assault up there over land. And they can do that, of course, much more rapidly than the tanks or the mechanized division. So I think you'll see maybe some airborne operations, air assault very early on.
But all at once.
All at once. All
at once. Not like the first Gulf War, where there was the Air Force and everything.
That's right.
Now, Colonel, I want to show a picture, a live shot from Baghdad tonight. And not a lot of parties going on there. Okay? The Associated Press reporting the city is a ghost town, that most people, it's a city of 5 million. Most of the citizens of Baghdad have gotten out of Dodge. They're gone. And this will make it a lot easier for coalition forces, correct?
Absolutely. What we're trying to do with this simultaneous attack that's been very well described already is avoid as much as we possibly can civilian casualties and hurting civilian buildings, even bridges. It's interesting you say, they've abandoned the place, it looks at, but they leave the lights on, which is easier for us. This is not a smart guy that's running this from Baghdad. But yeah, this looks like everybody understands what's about to happen. And as you've already mentioned, maybe letting them sweat them out a few more hours have them make some more mistakes. And also on the simultaneous attack issue, I also think we got guys already in country, very close.
Yeah, we're going to call. We don't want you to. We got a special forces guy coming up behind you, and he's going to tell us where they are and what they're doing.
Okay.
That is, of course, happening right now. Well, it looks like that. The calm before the storm, obviously, and we're all praying that this goes the USA's way. But the orders have been kill Saddam or capture him.
Capture or kill. They really want to try him for war crimes.
Do they really? Where? In The Hague? Or?
Well, it could be, or even within Iraq itself. There's a couple options going around, but they're going to get him, and if he stays in Baghdad or Tikrit, we're going to have our Delta Force go in, our special ops, and they're going to do what they call a snatch operation. They're going to snatch him, grab him, and then they'll deal with him.
Well, I hope they slap the living daylights out of his sons before they do. All right, General.
Thanks,
Colonel, thanks very much. We'll be seeing you guys throughout our coverage. And next on the rundown, as we mentioned, U.S. Special Forces already engaged in combat. We'll tell you how. And then a call for Secretary of State Powell to resign. We'll tell you why. Right back as The Factor continues from D.C.
I'm told that tonight is the fullest, the biggest part of the moon, the brightest part of the moon. And so I was wondering, that is not a desirable situation.
You're right, Connie, because the U.S. wants to have complete air dominance over the Iraqis, and the United States has sophisticated equipment to fly at night so they can see everything that's going on at night. The Iraqis won't necessarily be able to see U.S. bombers, other planes moving in. So when you have a full moon, that's not necessarily the most advantageous time to go into action. But the troops tell me, the commanders tell me that they're ready to move virtually under any of these kinds of circumstances, and that they're ready to move almost at a hair's notice. They've been training for this. They've been waiting for this. It looks like it's going to happen. It looks like it's going to happen very soon. It might be the next few hours, might be another day or two, but it certainly is going to happen, and the only decision is precisely when. We'll know when it happens, obviously, because we'll be hearing those bombs drop, and we'll be seeing a lot of that on TV.
Wolf, as we talk to you, we're looking at a live picture in Baghdad. Now, the question is, have U.S. troops made it all the way to the border? Are armored vehicles all there, or are they still moving north?
Some are still moving north, but there's a huge, huge contingent. And the biggest is right here in Kuwait, in the northern part of Kuwait, along the border. They're ready. They've got their APCs, their armored personnel carriers. They've got the heavy armor, the battle tanks. They're up there with the helicopters, the support equipment. The U.S. Air Force and the Navy have warplanes in the region, 5 aircraft carriers, and a lot of bases from which to depart and take off with their so-called smart bombs, the satellite-guided bombs, the so-called JDAMs. And in the first 24
coverage. There are reports that U.S. and British commandos have already embarked on some missions within Iraq. Joining us now from Los Angeles is one of the founders of the Delta Force, Command Sergeant Major Eric Haney. He's also the author of Inside Delta Force, the story of America's elite counter-terrorist unit. So what are your guys doing right now, do you believe?
Well, some of them are already in country, as we've heard the reports from our Defense Department, and they're doing preparation of the battlefield, they're collecting intelligence, and they're getting close to their targets. Some of the targets, we have things that we want to protect, we have things that we want to destroy. There are people, Iraqis, that we want to protect, and there are Iraqis that we want to make sure die. And they're getting as close as they can in preparation to ensure that all of that happens.
All right. Now, how do they divide up? There are so many commando divisions. You got the Army Rangers, you got the Delta Force, you got the Marines, you got the Navy SEALs. Do they all coordinate? They must, so that each have certain areas of dominance?
Yes, we do. They have areas of specialties. The Rangers perform the deep action strikes behind enemy lines that are pointed attacks. Think of them as shock infantry. They arrive by parachute usually. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, work with indigenous forces, as we saw in Afghanistan. And those 12-man teams can lead a local battalion.
All right, so let me stop you there. So the Green Berets probably down with the Shiites in the south, and
There's
perhaps
a case of that
with the Kurds up north, mobilizing them into units. All right.
Yes, they do. And then Delta Force handles those very surgical, precise missions where you can't send a bomb, and you have to make sure that someone is going to die.
All right, so they would be targeting certain Iraqis that they don't want to take out of there alive.
Yes, that's very true in this, and I would give you this. We're going to attempt to kill Saddam Hussein. We're going to try first with high explosives, drop from the sky, bombs, missiles, smart weapons. But right behind those will come in the teams to do the bomb damage assessments, go through the rubble, see if anyone's alive, and also go to those places where, for whatever reason, and usually because they're co-located among civilians, that we just have to send in men instead of a bomb.
All right. Now, the Major, General Valley, I should say, Sergeant Major, just said that he believes the U.S. would like to capture Saddam Hussein. You think the U.S. would rather kill him?
I'm certain we want to kill him. We're going to treat Saddam Hussein as a terrorist, and our mantra is we don't take them alive. We kill them during the fight. It's not capturing and kill them. And Saddam Hussein is a legal combatant. He's the head of the armed forces.
Right.
It's not an assassination. We're going after him. So instead of killing thousands of 19-year-old conscripts, let's kill those handful of people who caused this all to happen.
All right. I want to go to the live shot of Baghdad again. This is going to make it a lot easier for the Special Forces, Delta Force, and the others, because nobody's in Baghdad. They all took off. They all got out of there. So
very true.
Yeah. It's going to make their job a heck of a lot easier not having those civilian shields.
That's right, and we want those people in their homes, and the Iraqis understand that just intuitively. Protect yourself, take care of your children, your wife, your mother, and your father. Nobody supports a dictator except those who profit by supporting him.
Sure.
And I will give you this. Noriega in Panama, the greatest enemy he had was the Archbishop of Panama, the only man that would stand up to him. Noriega, when the first attack started, was left alone by all of those henchmen. And who did he flee to? Papal Nuncio took him in and gave him refuge in his final hours. So nobody wants to help this guy out.
No, only the people that, you know, I heard a story, I can't confirm it, that one of his soldiers, he did something that Saddam didn't like, and he cut the guy's tongue out and nailed it to the wall as a warning to the other soldiers. Haven't confirmed that, but came from a good source. Sergeant Major, thanks. Always a pleasure to see you. In a moment, call for Colin Powell to resign. And later, what should we do with Americans who obstruct the war, physically obstructed? Arrests in Washington today. The Factor will continue from D.C. after these announcements. In the Impact segment tonight, a professor at Brown University says the Secretary of State Colin Powell should resign because his philosophy is not compatible with the attitude of the Bush administration. Joining us now from Boston is Professor William Beeman, teaches Middle East Studies. And Professor Beeman realizes that Secretary of State Powell can't resign now, but you believe that he should have resigned before this, or he should after the war is over, correct?
When I wrote the article that you're referring to on March 5th, the negotiations were still going on in the United Nations, and it became clear that Colin Powell was being undercut by the White House. After all, foreign policy is not made in the Department of State, but is made in the White House. And so therefore, if there are failures, the White House has to bear the brunt of those failures.
All right. I'm going to tell you where you're wrong, and I hope you'll listen to me, and then you can reply. There was an article in the New York Times a few days ago which was very, very accurate. And what it said was that before Resolution 1441 was signed by all the Security Council in the United Nations last November, that Secretary Powell approached the French and said, don't support this unless you are willing to use force to back it up. The French, according to the New York Times, and I believe them, said, we will agree to use force to back up this resolution. Powell then went back to the White House, sold them on the United Nations, and the thing unfolded. But when the French double-crossed the United States, stabbed Powell in the back, and Powell, that's the way he puts it, he turned in favor of removing Saddam by force. That's what we believe happened.
I read the same article, and I read it slightly differently than you did. What it looked like, because a number of White House officials were quoted by Steve Weissman, who wrote the article, what it looked like was the White House was trying to blame the failure on Colin Powell for having convinced them and having convinced Condoleezza Rice that the French were going to go along with this. And so therefore the failure was actually placed on Powell. That was a prime example of the White House undercutting Powell.
Well, look, I mean, you can read it any way you want, but I don't care about the politics. I care about the truth. And the truth is, Professor, that Secretary Powell did want to go through the United Nations. He was the main booster of that route, and that President Bush listened to him. And a big mess ensued.
That's precisely what I'm saying, that the result, the United States had already, not through Colin Powell, essentially poisoned the waters with our European allies.
No, I don't think so. I don't see that at all. I mean, look, you can bring in Kyoto and all those other things, and there is some validity to that.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and his very intemperate remarks with regard to Europeans. They resent it.
That doesn't have anything to do with Secretary Powell. Secretary Powell, as you know, is very, very popular. All right, he's the most popular person in the Bush administration overseas. I give President Bush credit for listening to Secretary Powell. I feel sorry for Secretary Powell because the French stabbed him in the back and made him look like a fool. That's why Secretary Powell changed his mind and became so hawkish in the United Nations.
The French, of course, have issued another statement this evening in which they say that the United States was simply not able to get a majority, and so now they're blaming the French for the failure to
stop.
be able to...
You don't believe the French for a second. They sent their emissaries down to Africa to bribe those countries not to go along with it. Come on, they're villains here.
And we bribed other countries to go along with us. That's the way, that's the way the political situation has done.
What's the goal, Professor? You're right, we did. The goal is to remove a killer. That's our goal. France's goal is to enable a killer to stay in power.
The goal in the UN was to get 9 votes. And
no, the
so
goal... our goal is to remove Saddam Hussein because he's a killer with deadly weapons. France's goal is to enable him to stay in power. And you're telling me that both of those causes are on the same moral plane?
The French were trying to avoid a war, or so they said. And they were quite encouraged by the report of Hans Blix. The United States was very discouraged, and the French believed, and have said so publicly, that the United States was determined to go to war no matter what happened, and that they were being set up.
That's not true. If they had disarmed Saddam Hussein and he had put his weapons on the table as required by 1441, there's no way the United States could have gone to war because the mission would have been accomplished. So that theory is bogus. I'm going to give you the last word on this, but I feel bad for Powell. He may have miscalculated here, but he did it sincerely. Take the last word.
Well, what I'm saying is that Secretary Powell had a chance to make a strong case for his diplomatic initiative and the fact that the White House had not really supported this fully by resigning with honor. I think that now, of course, it really is impossible.
And I don't think you should. I think it's better for the U.S. to have him. I think it's better for the country to have. Professor, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Plenty more ahead as the factor moves along this evening. Charges all over the place. A media bias in the Iraq coverage. Take a look at that. And next, Americans who have struck the war effort. What should be done with them? The Factor will be right back from D.C.
Now that.
Resolve Problem segment tonight, we have had an interesting discussion on the Radio Factor today about freedom and the abuse of it. I submit to you this evening that any American who commits civil disobedience in this time of war and terror is putting other Americans in danger. That's because the authorities should be focusing all their energies on protecting us from killers like those on 9/11. And if those authorities are diverted by dragging you out of the street, our protection is not as great as it should be. Freedom of speech is fine. Breaking the law in this intense time is not. With us now in our New York studio is Professor Dave McFadden, who is chairman of the History Department at Fairfield University in Connecticut, and he sees things a bit differently. Now, Professor, when we were talking on the radio, you were saying historically America has a long tradition of dissent during war, and that's true. But it's different now because the war is here on our soil, and all the authorities must be coordinated to protect us. As I said, to divert their attention elsewhere, I think, is dangerous.
In the entire history of U.S. dissent during wars, there have been occasions like this in the past. There have always been dissent, and dissent must be protected if American freedoms are going to be protected. It's a major feature of the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, and it's been struggled for over many years, from the American Revolution to the Civil War to the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Every time there have been protesters, and that protecting that right is absolutely critical to protecting
But there's a difference
American
between protesting legally and illegally, and I'm going to submit to you. You see, look, you know what I'm saying here. This is different. It's a different circumstance. We need all our law enforcement to be protecting us against attacks at home. We don't need, and I believe it is morally wrong, for these protesters to divert those people away from protecting us. Professor, I believe it is morally wrong.
I think there's a difference between deciding that at this point in time it is wise to commit civil disobedience, and I think it is not. I think it is wrong at the moment to commit civil disobedience.
Good. I'm glad you feel that way.
But the right of civil disobedience, that is people breaking the law for moral reasons, and they know they're going to take the penalty for that, that right is firmly entrenched in American history,
all right,
from Henry David Thoreau in 1848 up to now.
I'm not going to argue with you, but I will tell you this. If I find out anybody is doing that, all right, and today, just today in Washington here, people were arrested. Again, taking the Washington police away from their primary duty of protecting the people who live in the city because these idiots were trying to block traffic. It is morally wrong for them to do it. They should be condemned by Americans and shunned.
No, they should be protected, because otherwise, what are we fighting for in this war? If we don't have our freedoms, if we don't have the ability to dissent. You don't have the freedom to become
a public safety hazard. I don't want my family attacked because you're going to stand out in front of my driveway waving a sign. It's a public safety issue now.
The problem with calling it a public safety issue, this has been true before in American history. We act like this situation is completely new. Of course, the World Trade Center disaster is completely new.
Absolutely.
But the idea of using bombs, the idea of blocking traffic like May Day, this has happened before in American history.
Yeah, but Professor, you're apologizing for people who may get other people killed because of their own ego.
No,
we all know that you can stand on your property and wave your sign all day long, or call up your friends, or make a banner, or take a television or radio or newspaper advertisement.
If someone is willing to block traffic, they should be arrested.
Don't divert the law enforcement authorities away from their duties because of your ego. That's what it's about. It's ego.
It's not always about ego. There's There's some great issues of conscience here. There's people who are opposed to war in any form. There are people around the world and in this country that are opposed to this war. They have a right to demonstrate.
Yeah, on their property, not breaking the law and diverting the other attention.
No, they have a right to protest publicly.
And I'll tell you what, if I were a prosecutor, I'd charge them with multiple felonies. I'd make their life a living hell. Hey, Professor, we appreciate your point of view. Very lively debate. Thank you. Next on the rundown, the most controversial story of the evening, if you can believe it, are some networks biased against the USA vis-a-vis Iraq. We'll name names. We'll debate it in a moment.
Time is up, and Saddam Hussein and his sons have not left Iraq. They are standing defiant against President Bush's ultimatum. Hello, I'm Lori Dew. For the latest from the region, let's go live to Mike Tobin at Camp Asalea in Qatar. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Lori. A big point of pride here at U.S. Central Command. The 17 Iraqis who gave themselves up to U.S. forces. They're being held now by Kuwaiti forces. Officially, they're being called defectors at this point because with no war, their giving up can't be called a surrender. So why is the staff here at Central Command so proud? Because of PSYOPs, or psychological operations. Some 17 million leaflets have been dropped over the past few months into Iraq. Among the messages on the leaflets, do not fight, give up, and you won't be harmed. The leaflets also advertise a radio broadcast, Commando Solo, broadcast from a converted C-130 that flies over Kuwait, pipes music and U.S. messages into Iraq. It tells Iraqi civilians not to fight, tells soldiers how to surrender, and tells them they won't be harmed if they do. Military officials say these Iraqis throwing in the towel before the fight has even started shows the PSYOPs are working. Lori, back to you.
Mike Tobin in Qatar, thank you very much, Mike. We'll have more news for you in about 40 minutes. The O'Reilly Factor from Washington, D.C. will continue after the break, but we'll have much more on the crisis with Iraq, so stay tuned.
17 years ago, Honda and
watching the #1 program on cable news. Enter the No Spin Zone on the O'Reilly Factor, the most powerful name in news, Fox News Channel.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Bill O'Reilly reporting from Washington, and in the personal story segment tonight, some conservative media watchdog groups are angry with ABC News, saying they have tilted their Iraq coverage in favor of the anti-war crowd. But some liberal groups have attacked Fox News as being too supportive of the Bush administration. On the newspaper front, Editor and Publisher magazine released a survey today of 44 American newspapers. A third of them support the Bush administration, a third of them are against the war in Iraq, and the final third are wishy-washy. Joining us now from New York is Greg Mitchell, editor of Editor and Publisher magazine. Here in New York, Jane Hall, professor of communications at American University and contributor to Fox News Watch. All right, you're going to talk about the networks. How do you see them?
Well, you know, the Media Research Center had a survey out about Peter Jennings, and while I might not have said some of the things the way he said them, if you read further in, he was taking a more questioning, more skeptical attitude than some of the other people. And I think that overall, I would say that there has been an attitude that the media were helping to prepare the country to go to war. The showdown Iraq, countdown Iraq.
Yeah.
And I don't happen to agree with the idea that the anti-war movement has been overcovered. I think it was missed largely until very, very recently. So I don't see that there has been a bias, except that I think there's been a willingness to believe the administration.
But I think what people are seeing, and this is with all due respect to Mr. Jennings, who I know very well, he's an internationalist. All right? Walter Cronkite said some very provocative things today, and I thought they were stupid things, with all due respect to Mr. Cronkite, because he's an internationalist. He puts foreign countries on the same moral plane as the United States in the war on terror. And quite frankly, that it stuns me that these people who are powerful, particularly Peter Jennings, do that when the primary focus of their coverage should be on America's war on terror, not how Belgium feels. You know what I'm talking about here?
Well, I do know what you're talking about.
And Peter's an internationalist.
Well, but Bill, think about it this way. I mean, I think this network has had an attitude of we are going to war, and this is the attitude.
Our coverage comes
your coverage
through.
Is we.
What?
Your coverage is we, the United States.
No, look at it. When they get out of line, you know I smack them down. All right? But the Fox News Channel and the Factor coverage is through the prism of the war on terror. That's our prism. ABC's coverage, and to some extent CBS, NBC, and CNN, their coverage is supposed to be, well, let's figure out what France thinks or feels. I don't give a hoot what France feels, all right? This is a war on terror that the United States is waging. Am I wrong?
Well, no, I don't think so, except that we just lost, and you've talked about this yourself, we just lost a huge diplomatic battle.
Right.
The world opinion is against us.
Right.
I think our media were late to tell us, hey, the rest of the world is not going along, and let's think about why that is.
I think the media was stunned. I think everybody was stunned that they would enable a Saddam Hussein. All right, let's go over to Mr. Mitchell for a newspaper recap. Who's doing what to whom in the papers, Mr. Mitchell?
Well, we've done a weekly survey for the past 6 weeks of editorial opinion of the top 50 newspapers. And surprisingly, we found from the very beginning that the larger city papers in Chicago, Los Angeles, even the Washington Post have been more supportive of the war effort, and that the opposition, which has been considerable, has come from Sunbelt cities, Republican areas such as the Orlando Sentinel, the Houston Chronicle, and who would believe that the Orange County Register would be more dovish than the Boston Globe?
Yeah. The Orange County Register dropped my column because I was in favor of the war, and they dropped it.
Right.
And I thought that was a good example of a paper that, you know, really adheres to freedom of speech and diversity.
Well, but the funny thing is that you know, the idea of the liberal media in large cities around the country has not proven true in this case now, on the war, editorially speaking.
Well, look, I mean, you got Boston Globe, and we can't make any. I have no idea what they're talking about. Do you know if they're before or after, or what are they? Do you know?
Right. Well, on the war, they were all over the place, that's for sure.
Okay, so we don't know what they stand for. Same thing with the New York Times.
Right.
We don't know what they're talking about. Half the time they're for it, half the time they're against it. See, these people are confused because they know that 70% of Americans are for the war. They understand the moral question here.
Well, what's interesting, we did our latest survey today, which found that even as we're about to go to war, a great number of the papers, more than half, were still expressing extreme criticism of the Bush administration. Even papers that are supporting the war have taken shots at the administration for bungling diplomacy and so forth, over and over.
They bungled diplomacy, and see. I don't think Americans are not willing to hear that. I think most Americans know that the Bush administration bungled the diplomacy, but they didn't do it They did it out of trusting, we had a discussion, Colin Powell, and they got stabbed in the back and all of that nonsense. But look, television has much more impact than newspapers, Jane. And you now have Dan Rather being criticized for the way he handled Saddam, which I didn't think was fair, because, you know, Saddam was going to walk out if he did anything bad. He wouldn't have got the interview, and the Iraqis were shooting the tape. He wouldn't have got the tape.
Right.
So he had to do what he had to do. But there is a perception that these guys do give the same moral weight to countries, to foreign countries, and I think they do.
Well, you know, you could be right about that. I think a bigger question is the reporting at home. I feel that the media have only recently begun to ask questions like, how much is this going to cost? What are our soldiers going to face when we get in there?
We don't know that.
Well, we're now going to war. There's even been disagreement between Bush administration people and the Pentagon.
Jane,
and I don't think that's gotten the kind of coverage that it should
how can I
have.
get this across to you? You don't fight a war on terror with a price tag. You know, you don't say, we're not going to invade because it's too much money.
No, but
it's outrageous.
But only now are people even in Congress saying, how much is this going to cost?
Who cares?
You don't,
Win the war.
You don't
then
care?
we'll figure it. No, I don't care one iota, because I want my family to be protected from anthrax. If it costs $5 billion, spend it.
But what about what our soldiers may face over there?
They're soldiers. They have to fight. That's what soldiers do.
Well, but I'm just making the point that I think it's very recent that we've had questions even being asked about this.
Questions about their stupid questions.
You think that's stupid to
yes,
ask?
absolutely. What are soldiers going to face? They're going to face the enemy. All right?
They may face biological
That's
weapons.
right.
I mean,
They may.
But the Wall Street Journal, ironically, has been one of the papers that has been talking about, but they may face hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, they may. They may. They're soldiers. That's what they're trained to do. We're fighting a war on terror. What are we saying? Well, I don't want to have hand-to-hand combat. I'll shoot them with a bazooka, but don't come near me with a knife. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, but the point is, I think that the media have really been very, very closely aligned with the Bush administration, and they've largely taken what has been said.
Let me give Mr. Mitchell a last word on this. Do you think the print coverage has been fair generally, Mr. Mitchell?
I would agree with her that newspapers, until recently, were not asking the right questions. In fact, we did a cover story last month about the unasked questions about the Bush administration. And I don't think conservatives really have too much room for complaint about newspaper coverage in the past couple months.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Very lively. Jane, always good to see you. Mr. Mitchell, appreciate it. When we come back, gas prices already hurting most Americans. Will the situation get better or worse after Saddam Hussein is swinging on the gallows or in some cell somewhere? We'll take you to that story in a moment.
Several hundred officers from the New York City Police Department are participating in Operation Atlas. Members of the National Guard have been called out to help out with this effort as well. The mayor is estimating it's going to cost the city $5 million a week in order to pay for this effort. The mayor is saying that this is a special city, a city with special needs. He also says that New York is a place that symbolically represents everything that would be attractive to terrorists. Connie?
Jason Carroll, thank you, in New York City. Jeff Flock is our Chicago bureau chief, and Jeff is at the Sears Tower. I understand we have heard before that the Sears Tower was feared to be a terrorist target. Jeff?
Indeed, they're focusing in Chicago County on perceived targets. One of them is the Sears Tower. Perhaps you see it behind me. Tallest building in the United States, particularly after 9/11. A lot of people that work up there very scared. We want to show you what it looks like in the daylight and tell you what they're doing. Specifically, putting up cement.
Don't you love nursing?
All folks that enter the Sears Tower go through a magnetometer. Bomb-sniffing dogs are used. They x-ray every shipment that comes to the building. Another perceived target, O'Hare Airport in Chicago. It is the world's busiest. We spent a good bit of time.
People 12 and over.
Many of those cars we saw today being pulled over by Chicago police officers, having their trunks open, look underneath.
The Total Choice Plus package adds over 15 additional channels to Total Choice, all for just a few dollars more, bringing you more adventure, more laughs, more exploration, more music, and more entertainment choices for everyone in the family.
Action!
Over 130 channels in all, including local channels. Total Choice Plus. It's an easy and affordable way to get more out of your DirecTV. Visit DirecTV.com or call 1-800-DirecTV and order today.
This March, it's not how big you are, it's how bad you want it. You take on the best. You fight for the upset. You lay it all on the line. From 64 to the Sweet 16, supplement your local CBS sports coverage of the NCAA tournament with up to 37 games outside your region. Get Mega March Madness from DirecTV for only $49. Call 1-800-GET-SPORTS now or visit DirecTV.com. Mega March Madness only from DirecTV. You know you want it.
In the back of the book segment tonight, as of last Monday, regular gasoline was averaging $1.73 a gallon throughout the USA, 44 cents higher than a year ago. Now, with the war in Iraq, will gasoline get even more expensive, and why did it go up in the first place? With us now in our New York studio is Michael Rothman, senior energy analyst for Merrill Lynch. All right, so we got to assume that Saddam Hussein is toast, regime change in the next few weeks. What happens to gas prices?
Unless there's something cataclysmic in the Gulf, whether it's Iraq's oil fields being destroyed or some impairment of Kuwait or Saudi oil flows, the price of gasoline is actually probably topping out, actually, at this point.
How far do you see it declining once we control the Iraqi oil flow?
If we look out over, say, 6 to 9 months and crude prices eventually pull back towards $25 a barrel, that should translate into about 30 cents lower prices at the pump from where we are today.
All right, why did they run up? I was out in California last week, Mr. Rothman. So they're $2.50 a gallon on some of those. Now, we know that California taxes are through the roof, but why did it run up so fast?
Well, California's got its own problems because it makes its own gasoline. It's different than the rest of the country. But if you look at gasoline and what constitutes the actual price, there's two big components. The first is crude oil, and we had a pretty major run-up over the course of the year, which added a significant increase to what people are paying at the pump. The second has to do with factors that actually affect the supply of gasoline specifically. It's a very technically difficult product to manufacture, and we've had problems with Venezuela, and we also have had problems related to the strike there, but it has to do with actual supply and demand considerations.
All right, so you're saying that not enough gasoline was actually manufactured, and that's why the prices went up?
That's correct. Gasoline, if you look at inventories of gasoline, they've dropped to fairly low levels.
And whose fault was that? Was that the oil company's fault?
Oh, not at all. Oil companies right now are trying to maximize production. In fact, they've been blamed for trying to deal with the heating oil shortage and cutting back on gasoline output, so they were damned if they did one or the other.
Yeah, but I mean, whose fault is it? Is it all Venezuela, that chaos down there? Is it all their fault?
No, that would be wrong to say. It has to do with the fact that there's a general shortage of refining capacity in the United States.
We don't have enough factories to refine the gas?
No, we haven't built a new refinery in this country in 30 years. And
all right, so we don't have enough facilities to refine the gas. That's a problem.
That is a real problem. In fact, it was identified by the Bush administration in their policy a year ago, and it was a very revelation transient document.
Is that because of environmental concerns, or
exactly.
Why is that?
If you look at gasoline, to try to make it more environmentally friendly, certain things had to be pulled out of the barrel. And what that does is effectively reduce the amount that refiners can make. So you have a structural problem making enough fuel.
Well, all of this would be moot if we get those fuel cells online and if people can conserve 10%, but they won't, and we aren't. Now, I don't really understand, if the refineries were bad for the last year, why it runs up 44 cents in the last 2 months. You know, we always had the refinery problem. It seems to me somewhere along the line somebody's taken advantage.
No,
you don't believe that.
No, I know there's some people who have that on their agenda, but if you look at crude prices, they ran from $27 up to $40 a barrel, and every dollar adds about 2.5 cents, all things held equal. And then on top of that,
where are they now? They're 40 at the high. Where are they now?
We're actually trading right now at about $30 a barrel.
All right, so they're down $10 a barrel from their high. How come that hasn't translated to the pump?
Because that's all happened in the last 4 days or the last 5 days. So that's why I said
we can see gas prices falling then in the next couple of weeks?
Unless there's something cataclysmic in this war, they should actually begin to fall back.
To what level, do you know?
Well, again, if you look for crude to get back towards $25, and let's say it's going to take several months because physically the oil balance is very tight. If you get, I'm trying to do the math in my head, but let's say we fall $14 on average, that's about 30 cents a gallon at the pump.
All right, so it goes down to about $1.40 a gallon instead of $1.70.
Correct.
All right. All right, Mr. Rothman, very good. We think we know what's going on here, but we just hope that we get that Iraqi oil flow out of there, and I think that'll bring everything down. Next, we'll wrap things up with the most ridiculous item of the day, some of your mail.
Coming up on Hannity and Combs tonight, the clock has run out. Can anything stop a war with Iraq? We'll talk with former Vice President Dan Quayle. And Indiana Senator Evan Bayh is here. Does the president have the full support of Congress? Former Secretary of State Alexander Haig joins us. How did we get to the brink of war? Could anything more have been done on the diplomatic front? And a Marine will tell us about the 37 days he spent as a POW in the first Gulf War. All that coming up in just a few minutes on Hannity and Combs.
Time now for the most ridiculous item of the day. As you may know, actress Susan Sarandon is about as left-wing as they come, this side of Beijing. However, her 79-year-old mother, Lenora Tomlin, says, quote, "I am a conservative. I voted for George W. Bush, and I simply agree with most everything he has said." Now, wouldn't you like to go to Easter dinner with Susan and Lenora? I would. Might be ridiculous, but it could be a lot of fun. Finally, tonight, to mail tons of it about the Pope. Kevin Parasol, Arnold, Maryland. Bill, I heard you say you are a Catholic, but you disagree with the Pope. I know Saddam is a bad person who kills his citizens, but you should know that what counts is the afterlife. Saying bad things about the Pope will only hurt you in the afterlife. Well, Mr. Parasol, allowing innocent people to be killed is not going to do you too much good in the afterlife either, if you get my drift. Susanna Ruddle, Herndon, Virginia. As a Catholic, I am appalled that Pope John Paul II has not aggressively challenged child molesters and tyrants. Perhaps our church needs a regime change, too. Michael Vincent, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. While Bill, the papacy has only made 2 infallible statements in the past 150 years, you average about 3 a show. The Pope giving any backing to this war would endanger Christians around the world. Irene Elena May, Roanoke, Virginia. Mr. O'Reilly, I personally find it hard to believe that this Pope, who was a staunch supporter of freedom in his native Poland, would be so opposed to a war that would release thousands of people from the iron fist of the tyrant Saddam. Tom Rona, Barnegat, New Jersey. Bill, why do you bother going to Mass? If you don't believe the Holy Father is infallible, you are not a Catholic. Mr. Verona, you are so misguided. The Pope is only infallible when he speaks on the issues of faith and morals, not public policy. Peggy Hebert, Los Angeles. Bill, it seems to me, for all the time you spend pontificating, perhaps a little humility might draw you closer to the truth. The Pope himself has not called this an unjust war. Well, Ms. Hebert, the Pope calls the war immoral, okay? Larry Papa, Bend, Oregon. Of all people, Pope John Paul should understand how delay caused the unnecessary deaths of my family and millions of other Polish citizens as Hitler marched through Poland. If the world had stood up to him in 1936, Poland would not have been enslaved for 50 years. Pat Corbat, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Bill, don't worry too much about the Catholic League. Thinks of you. Well, Mr. Corbat, if I worried about what everybody thought of me, I'd be in a jar somewhere. Kevin Mann, also from Roanoke. Mr. O'Reilly, I'm a 16-year-old high school student, and I believe the best way to teach is for teachers not to give us their opinions, but to help us find our own. Kristen Chen, Ocean Township, New Jersey. I am a 14-year-old in 8th grade. Lately, my class has been asking our teachers if we could discuss the war with Iraq. But most teachers respond by telling us it is not appropriate. Well, I disagree with that, Kristen. You guys should be able to discuss this and any other important topic in your history and civics classes. And you can tell the teacher I said that. How about the website? I want you to check that out. www.foxnews.com/O'Reilly. Beautiful spring day here in Washington, and that means you need Factor Gear. It also means you need a paperback copy of The No Spin Zone, which is in your bookstore right now or on the website, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Now, why do you need a paperback copy of The No Spin Zone on a nice spring day? I haven't figured that out yet, but I will. Also, please email us with pithy comments. O'Reilly at foxnews.com. O'Reilly at foxnews.com. Now, we're getting about 30,000 letters a week, okay? So the odds of getting on are not that great. But if you keep it pithy, right to the point, and you have a little different take, then you got a better chance. But even if you don't get on the air, I read a lot of the mail. I read about 1,000 letters today, okay? And that helps me formulate my analysis, talking points, and all of that stuff based upon what you guys are, how you're seeing it. So it's worth to write us. And we'd like to hear from all of you around the world as well. All right? That is it for us today. As always, we thank you for watching The Factor. Please remember the Radio Factor on Westwood One, where we're causing trouble every day. Hannity and Combs is next. Dan Quayle will be with them. I'm Bill O'Reilly reporting this evening from Washington, D.C. We do hope to see you again next time. And remember, the spin stops right here.
Welcome to Hannity and Combs. I'm Alan Combs, and right to our top story tonight, looking live at Baghdad. The president's 48-hour deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq has now passed. So what happens now? We're joined tonight by the former Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle. Mr. Vice President.